it's truly the tale of two Americas because on one hand you have this economic pain for those who are on the bottom rung of the economic spectrum, and then on the other side you have like the lowest interest rates, people refinancing homes, uh, vacationing, buying second homes. And you're listening to the Brown Perspective. This is Eduardo, and I'm here with the one and only RO.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much, man. It's been a while since we had a chance to get together and have a conversation.
Yeah, it's been too long. These days with the news cycle, everything happens so fast. You stop having sessions for about 2 or 3 weeks and it feels like a year.
For sure. But I've definitely almost felt like Trevor Noah too. I felt like I needed to disconnect to take care of myself and sort of recuperate from the COVID-19, the first half of the COVID-19, because now we're in
hmm
the second more difficult half of it. It seems.
I had to do that with Twitter. And I
Mm.
actually and Twitter happened the same way that Facebook. I ended up doing that with Facebook first and then Twitter. What ends up happening is these algorithms that they have in order to feed you information based on what they think you'll like. At least with me, it backfires. I end up stuck in echo chambers, and all I get is stuff from people that I already know how they feel, where they stand on things. And I don't want that. I want to get opinions and information outside of the people that I usually follow. I mean, I follow people for I want to get what they take, but that's not the only stuff that I want. So I actually had to detach from. I don't even log into Facebook anymore, but I had to get off of Twitter as well because it was yeah, I needed a break as well from everything that's going on and just focus on other things.
I hear you. I hear you. I think it's important to disconnect and take care of yourself. And it's true. I mean, there's so much going on and so many things that we'll probably try to tackle in the next few weeks. But I think we wanted to start closer to home this week and talk a little bit about what's going on around homelessness, about the moratorium to try to keep people housed, and some of the political dynamics that are taking place right now. So, as some of you may be aware, just last week, the city of Los Angeles passed an ordinance and the mayor signed an ordinance to basically make homelessness illegal in the city of Los Angeles. And yes, they're trying to provide some supports and services as they try to implement this law, but the reality is you just got to question the timing of doing this when we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and we know that it's just difficult to find housing in LA because it's
hmm
so expensive and so many other factors.
Where do they expect them to go? That's always, I'm sure that's the first question that a lot of people have.
Yeah, and the reality is that they're probably gonna get pushed to other cities,
Yeah.
some of the other surrounding cities, probably the unincorporated areas. I think the sad reality is that there's a lot of homeless encampments and some of the river trails and some of the other areas where the homeless basically try to live their lives out, out of out of the public view, but obviously they end up when you are riding a bike or taking a stroll, driving on a highway, and you see tents under bridges or in parks and things like that, you know that the situation is really bad. So the reality is that yes, some of them may be housed, but that's the problem that the city does not have enough shelters to accommodate the homeless, and then there's not enough housing for them to really, one, first of all, is getting off the street. Second of
hmm
all, is getting the support and services that they need to stay housed, to get a job, and to get their lives back in track.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, they're just going to get pushed somewhere else. Some of them, if they're lucky enough, they'll find family. Maybe
Hmm.
if obviously a lot of the big reason why they're out there is mental illness, but a very small percentage, maybe they can go back and move in with family, with friends. Others are just going to try to get away from being in areas where they're highly visible. Because, right as you mentioned, all of these homeless encampments, the more and more people that are homeless, it becomes harder and harder to hide, and it's easy for people to notice them. So they'll just naturally gravitate towards other areas. And if they find a place where they think they can hide and go about their lives without being noticed, then they'll stick there. Hard to say where that is. It could be other cities, could be other neighborhoods, it could be other areas where it's just they're hidden from view, and they're not exposed. So ultimately, though, it's going to get even worse. The moratorium, this is something else that we're going to talk about, in California at least, was extended till September 2021. But what do they think is going to happen afterwards? They can't keep extending these relief programs forever. So if people don't have the money to pay for these things now, chances are they're probably not going to have the money to pay their rent or to pay their mortgage in another month or two, right? So we're just in a really tough situation, and considering how much money the government usually hands out, especially to corporations and to others, it's hard to believe that they don't really have the funds to be able to provide more of a permanent, long-term solution to this, instead of just the short-term patches that they're doing.
Yeah, and to me, it's also the fact that the homelessness issue was a problem here in LA and across and in Washington D.C. too. When you think about, and actually just the other day, it was ironic that in driving by the city of LA, by City Hall, you see all of these tents right in front of the City Hall. So I think maybe that was probably one of the reasons why they decided to pass that law to avoid the optics of having those tents so close to the seat of power here in LA. But ironically, it's the same case in DC. There were tons of homelessness in Washington D.C. The quote unquote the capital city of the richest, most powerful country on this planet, and in some ways appreciating that it was a huge problem before the pandemic. Then we have a pandemic and the subsequent downturn. And the reality is that there are many homeless folks, a lot of people who are staying with families, crashing with friends, living out of their cars, living out of trailer homes, and across the county and across the country, really. So they lost jobs. They don't have a way to stay on their feet, and then they are facing the prospect of getting kicked out of their homes because the federal moratorium on evictions had expired. And it's amazing because it's truly the tale of two Americas. Because on one hand, you have this economic pain for those who are on the bottom rung of the economic spectrum, and then on the other side, you have like the lowest interest rates, people refinancing homes, uh, vacationing, buying second homes. And it's amazing that we are living those two very different realities at the same time.
Yeah, and even the price of used cars has skyrocketed. And
Hmm.
used cars, you would think it's the people that need them the most that are buying used cars because they can't afford new cars. And yeah, this is the way that the government functions. We've talked about this before, about inflation and the way that they're handling it. They're pinned to a corner, because of the way that they handled the 2008 financial crisis. What they did was essentially they lowered interest rates in order to reinflate the bubble. They never actually let the economy heal on its own. And because we didn't have the pain back then of what it would have meant for the economy to correct for a while, we never really had the full recovery, where the Fed just, they pin themselves to a corner where they can never raise interest rates. And maybe that's by design. Maybe they just never meant to. But we see the effects of it. You have low interest rates since after the last financial crisis. They tried to raise them a little bit. The economy almost collapsed in 2018. I think the Dow Jones dropped by like 20% that around that time. And then they reversed course. They had to start lowering interest rates again. And then COVID hit, and that made things even worse. And so you get this crazy dichotomy where people that already owned assets, people that already had wealth, it's even easier for them to get more assets, to grow their wealth, to consolidate, for businesses to borrow money to expand. And people that, for whatever reason, were not in a position where they own assets or they didn't have much in savings, that they're really struggling. And now they're at the whims of whatever scraps the government decides to give them, which is this the Republicans, you hear it from them now about this infrastructure bill and them sending money out to people. It's always interesting that they all of a sudden they seem to care about budget, but they never really seem to care about spending a ton of money overseas in foreign wars and bailing out Wall Street and bailing out corporations. Oh, they only care when it comes to time to actually help people, families that are in danger of being kicked out of their homes. And so, yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's just sad, but there's really no easy fix for this. The government's not going to release the funds to try to provide a lasting solution. And, you know, to be honest, I don't even know what a long-term solution looks like to this. Let's just assume that the government was willing to put a ton of money into this. I mean, how long would it take to build homeless shelters? How long would it take to organize the logistics of doing all that? Ultimately, you're just, even if a ton of unlimited money was released today, well, actually, that's not true, right? You could release a ton of unlimited money so that you don't then kick people out. But then if you did that, then you would just subject the rest of the nation to inflation, because the more money you pump into the economy, the more inflation you're going to get. So it's just like there's no easy solution. There are no easy solutions here, and unfortunately, it's always the most vulnerable that end up suffering the most because of this.
Yeah, and but just a couple of points. I think the first point is that there were certainly a lot of people who suffered in 2008 with that recession, and I think a lot of people who lost homes and who lost a lot of wealth. And when you think about pe people of color and Latinos who lost homes and a lot of wealth because of what happened in the market then. And then the other fact is that there is a lot of money and there's billions of dollars that have been allocated to help renters and landlords keep their homes. The problem is that money is sort of getting stuck in the bureaucracy
of the states, not the federal government, but the individual states also, right?
Yeah. And then the other point is that you're right. I mean, this is a problem that wasn't created in one day, and that's going to take a while to be addressed. But I think one place where one of the things that has led to it is the fact that there was not a livable wage, right? A living wage, because part of the issue has been that there's a lot of people who are working just as hard, if not harder, but they cannot afford the type of lifestyle that was afforded to a lot of people back in the day. And the fact that you have to work 2 to 3 jobs just to even make it, versus having just one job that pays you well, that gives you good benefits, and that allows you to spend time with your family or do the things that you also need to do to take care of yourself and be mentally sane.
Yeah, and here, especially in markets like LA and San Francisco, it's really hard for people with just regular jobs to be able to keep up with the rate of inflation, because there's always people moving in here with wealth that are willing to pay more for houses, that are willing to pay more for apartments. and they just price everybody else out. So this is just gentrification in a citywide level, no longer just neighborhoods. Like everyone's feeling the pinch. This coronavirus has made everything a lot worse, especially again because of the inflation. So it's just a confluence of events that have led us to this point, and I don't see how this gets any better anytime soon. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be kicked out, even with the relief programs that Congress did manage to pass, where at least for homeowners, they're able to modify their mortgages. They're able to tack on the whatever balance they have right now. They can add it to the end of the mortgage, or they can refinance that into like a separate account that they don't have to pay until they sell the house. They can refinance into lower interest rates. That will help homeowners, but then renters, they're not really going to be able to, again, right? It's helping those that already own assets. Renters don't get the same type of assistance. So, it's unfortunate. It really sucks for kids, especially young kids that are going to be subjected to this. It's very traumatic to all of a sudden get kicked out of your home. Like now, personally, I mean, as poor as we grew up, fortunately, we never had to go through that. But I do remember during the riots in back in '92 that there's a liquor store right down the street from the apartments where we lived, and we had to evacuate. So, I mean, we didn't have anywhere to go, so we ended up staying at the church where my mom used to go. I think we stayed there for 2 nights. And, as a kid, he's just trying to process all that. And, I mean, I knew it was temporary, but still, it's pretty scary. But now imagine being a young kid or a teenager having to go through getting kicked out of your home and living out of a car and being in that situation and even not even knowing how long that's going to last. It's just terrible. It's just really... It's pathetic in a way that such a wealthy nation like this one subjects its people to that I've always thought this about Mexico because I'm Mexican, but now I'm thinking about it for the US as well. Like how can these politicians, how can these people have any pride in themselves, in their country, when they're doing well? They're the ones that are legislating, but then yet so many people are living in misery and suffering so many hardships. How can you look at yourself in the mirror and like claim to be like, I'm a proud American and blah, blah, blah. It's just, yeah, just frustrating.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that's where the racism and otherism comes in, where they're proud because people like them are doing well, and they feel that okay, we're doing well, and somehow those people who haven't made it, who are poor, who are
Yeah.
refugees, is something wrong with them, something wrong where the places they come from,
These are
and
these are the type of people that they'll tell you the story when they were born, that the minute they were born, they told their mother to go home and that they were going to go home on the bus, right? And
yeah,
they walked out of the hospital and got a job and then scraped some change for the bus, went home, immediately started working and got a life, and nobody ever helped them. They picked themselves up by their bootstraps, right? These type of people, the ones that start believing their own story and literally think that nobody ever helped them.
the sort of the exceptional individuals which make up a lot of our ruling class.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think that's one of the reasons why I think that the activism that Representative Cori Bush did is so important, because she's someone who lived through that experience, someone who was homeless herself, who lived, and I think she lived out of her car with her kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a perfect example of where, Representative Cori Bush, who was very involved in sort of the movement, and it was actually before the Black Lives Matter movement. It was the Ferguson, like I think she got very involved with the movement during the Ferguson uprisings, and she was able to get into politics. Now she's a representative, and I think now she is in a position to bring that activism into her job, into Congress, and sort of do something that to some may seem like political theater, but in a way, it was a very effective way to put pressure on the Biden administration to extend the moratorium on evictions, and for sort of the more progressive uh, party or progressive side of the Democratic Party to highlight some of the needs and the things that need to happen. And it's true, right? Like, and the irony is that she did it at a time where the House of Representatives usually leaves for their summer vacation, right? And that's the time where members of Congress usually, yes, they take some vacation, but a lot of them are campaigning back home, raising money. But they're so consumed into getting elected and keeping their position that they oftentimes don't think don't finish the work or handle the things that need to be
Hmm.
handled.
But
So
that's
I
what
think
happened
it
this
was
time, though. That they went on their vacation without passing, without extending the eviction protection.
correct. So this was one I thought was a very effective way to bring attention to the need for Congress to act, and also for the administration to act.
Yep, but it was disappointing that they couldn't get their shit together. And they knew this was coming. They knew that they had to pass an extension, and yet they failed to do it. And it took the CDC to issue an extension, which, by the way, is just 1 month. So that I mean that helps, but here we're going to be in the same place a month from now. And again, this is just they're just going to find a way to keep kicking the can down the road, and each month I think more and more people will get left behind, will get kicked out, will lose their homes. Um, but yeah, I didn't want to sidetrack you with what you were saying about Cori Bush. I do agree with you that I think because she knows it personally, it's hard for her to just leave and not do anything. It's a lot harder once you've lived through that experience. Once, and also that's why for a lot of activists too, people that are out there advocating for a certain group of people, it's really important that they get to spend some time to know those people, to know to live that struggle, because it becomes personal, and that motivates you even more, right? There's a lot of Twitter, or what are they called, keyboard warriors or activists that are just online typing away all the time, but they don't really have any relations with the people that they're supposed to be standing up for.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it was also just because I think that's one of the frustrating things about politics. It is the art of compromise in so many ways, but it's also about building political will, and the will to make it so that something like the moratorium is enacted. So I think that I think that it just sort of proves that the type of power that one person can have in sort of um, redirecting the debate and redirecting attention and bringing attention to a cause, and trying to really integrate that activism and harness that activist experience and energy, and sort of use that to try to get some long-term policies implemented to address some of the root causes of the issue.
But yeah, that's my concern though. But that, like I mentioned earlier, that they're not really going to focus on long-term solutions. If they really want to make a difference, what they need to do is forgive the debt that the renters owe, student debt forgiveness, open up the healthcare system to make it more accessible for people, so that they don't have to pay. So either expand Medicare or find another way to make healthcare free, maybe even for the next 2 years or whatever, as long as we're in the middle of this pandemic, or at least if we're getting out or whatever, right? We have the Delta variant now that we're hearing about. So it's hard to say whether or not we'll be in the clear by the end of this year. But in the meantime, those are things that they could do to actually help people. Because if all they're doing is extending this moratorium and that's it, and then they just expect people to go back to work, I mean, what jobs are they going to go back to? And even if they go back to those jobs, they're so behind on their payments that, as you mentioned earlier, there's just no way that they can crawl back out of that, because they probably have credit card debt that's charging them 19%, 29% interest each month. They have other debt that they have to pay. So they're just not making enough to get out of that hole. So if they really want to help here, what it's going to take is a lot of debt forgiveness. Now, that in a way also could backfire again, because it leads to more inflation, but they have nothing but bad options at this point. This is just the situation that we're in. And the only option that they really have to help a lot of people not get kicked out of their homes and live on the streets is to help them, materially help them with the money that they owe. Uh,
It's
Debt
true,
forgiveness.
and I think that that's probably only not even half of what you said is gonna get done,
Hmm.
but some of that's gonna get done, and I think this probably takes us into the other conversation that we want to have. But I think it's about, yes, it's sort of about forgiving debt, but it's also about creating jobs and kind of getting people ready to for the new economy, and doing so in a way similar to what happened with the great new with the New Deal, right? That what the way that it was done so that the country could build the infrastructure and put people to work and sort of be able to generate economic activity before the best economic stimulus came around in December 6th, 1941, which was World War II. So I know that this administration is really now focused on implementing, getting a the infrastructure bills passed, because they know that likely is that they're going to lose the House of Representatives
Hmm.
in next year's election. So then it's going to be more gridlock and less action.
Yeah, but I don't want to sound like a pessimist here, but I mean, these infrastructure jobs that they're creating, they'd have to pay people $30, $40 an hour for that to help a lot of the people that are already in debt. If they're going to pay them $15 an hour, yeah, it's better. It's better than what they're paying now, but it's not a lot of money. And again, if you're already behind several months in debt, credit card, rent, you're behind on your rent, you're behind on your credit card bills, you're probably behind on your car payments. And so there's just, it's, it's really hard. This economy. So I hear the comparisons to the Great New Deal, back during the Great Depression. But our economy is nothing like the Great Depression. The type of inflation that we have is a lot higher than what we had back then, and the wages do not reflect that. If you'd have to adjust the wages to reflect the type of inflation that we've had to really help people, try to course correct and dig themselves out of these hole out of the hole. So I mean, look, it'll help, and like I've always said, I'll take whatever help we get. It's still the United States is still a lot better than the type of deal that people are getting in other countries. So in that sense, yeah, that's the silver lining, but it looks pretty bleak.
Damn. Well, on that positive note, what are your closing thoughts?
That I just keep thinking next month they'll find another way to extend this a little bit more, and then the month after that they'll find another way, but they won't tackle the real problems because real problems are challenging to tackle. So I don't know. I don't know how this pans out in the next few years. I hope um, that a lot of people are saved from having to go through this, but reality tells me that there's going to be a lot of suffering, and let's just try to do our part, try to put pressure, try to speak up against this. If we know someone that needs help, try to help them out. Do our part to help people out that are in need.
Great. I fully support that, and I think that part of the reason why it's going to be hard to have these conversations is that we can even agree on the election results from the last election and whether or not there was an insurrection. So I think that if we can have agreements on very basic facts and truths, it's going to be very difficult to find agreement and be able to tackle some of these huge problems that impact us all. But like you, I remain optimistic. I know that we as a country, as people, both people who have lived here and people who come from other areas, other regions of the world, we've survived and gone through a lot. We're resilient, and hopefully we can continue to do the the important work step by step to get to a better society, a better future too. So
In
to your
one,
point, let's do our part.
yeah, and one more closing thought is anyone out there listening, don't listen to whatever news sources like Fox News tell you, because what they'll do is they'll say, "Oh, look at all these people. They just want handouts. They want more money. The economy has opened up. Go out there and get a job." Literally, that's what they said. I was watching a segment earlier today, and just understand that what they do is they take the worst of the worst from a segment of the population, say 1 or 2% of the people that probably are just collecting the government checks, and they're not looking for work, and they're just sitting at home doing nothing, and whatever, they probably have some setup where they don't have to worry too much, or maybe they'll end up on the street because of their own actions. But that's always a very small percentage of people. You can't extrapolate an entire group of people based out of like 1 or 2% of people that are going to exploit the system. So if you're listening to Fox News or any other conservative outlet that's doing that nonsense, just try to think beyond that, because that's how they divide people, and they that's how they deflect and then shift the conversation towards victim blaming and towards other stuff that doesn't really solve any of the problems, because they don't really want to talk about solutions. They just want to scapegoat and blame people. So stay away from those narratives.
Good point. But do come to the good narratives that we have at the Brown perspective. Hopefully, you will continue to find our conversations interesting and thought provoking. Definitely let us know what you think. Follow us on our YouTube channel, our Instagram account, Twitter account. And thank you so much for listening to our conversations.
Nos vemos.
Ciao.